What is the most interesting class you explain the aspects of the class that made it interesting? Include details and examples in your explanation. Some people like to read classic, prefer watching film versions of the same stories. Which do you prefer and why? Include details and examples in your explanation. Describe a city or town where you have lived. This place is either a good place or not a good place to live. Include details and examples in your explanation. Some students take one long, others have several shorter tests throughout the course. Which situation do you think is better for students, and why? Include details and examples in your explanation. Describe your idea of why this job would be appealing to you. Include details and examples in your explanation. Some people like taking their vacation for spending their vacation in the countryside. Which do you prefer and why? Include details and examples in your explanation. Now listen to two students as they...
Have you voted on the food service yet?
No, but I intend to. I'm going to vote for the second option.
That's the one that closes the main cafeteria, isn't it?
Right.
But the main cafeteria is in the student center. That's where everyone goes at lunchtime. Doesn't it make sense to have food there?
But it's always so crowded in there at lunchtime. You have to wait a long time in the food line, and there are never enough places to sit.
That's true, but they say they'll add more tables.
There aren't enough bike racks outside either. I have no place to put my bike. Most of the time I eat at one of the snack bars. Besides, I like the idea of having several smaller eating places all over campus. That seems a lot more convenient, since we have classes all over campus anyway. It also means less crowding, and you don't have to wait as long to get your food. More food choices, too. I kind of like the idea of barbecue on campus.
Yeah, that does sound good, doesn't it?
The man expresses his opinion about the campus food service. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to two students as
Hey, Gavin, you should enroll in this course for tutors.
Me? I'm not a tutor.
But you want to go to graduate school, right?
Right.
And in graduate school, you'll be a teaching assistant, right?
Probably.
Then this training course is just what you need. It'll give you a head start on learning how to teach. Some of the universities don't give their TAs much training. They just expect you to know how to do it, so this course might be really useful for the future.
Maybe. I could at least get a job as a math tutor.
And you'd learn how to do it right. You'd learn some practical theories about teaching and learning.
True.
Anyway, it might give you skills that could be useful later, no matter what kind of work you end up doing.
the woman expresses her opinion about the training course for tutors. State her opinion and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to two students as
I just heard the college is increasing the phys ed requirement to 2 courses.
Well, that's what they want to do, but I don't think it'll happen. Everybody I know hates the idea.
Why? Phys ed is good for us. Most students need to get more exercise. That's why we have a new phys ed building.
But it's not up to the college to require us to get more exercise. We have a responsibility to make that choice on our own. I don't think there should be any phys ed requirement in college. High school, yes, but not college. Our main job in college is to study. We need to exercise our brains, not our bodies. Besides, I already get a lot of exercise. I'm on my neighborhood basketball team, and I also go hiking and rock climbing.
Well, obviously you don't need physical education, but other people do.
The man expresses his opinion about the physical education requirement. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to two students as they...
This course isn't open to students. That means we can't take it. Don't you think that's strange?
Well, yeah, kind of. But students have to be enrolled in the theater arts program if they want to be in any of the plays. This course is for people who live in town.
I don't think that's right. We pay tuition and fees, so we should be able to take any course we want at this school.
But this is a chance for other people to work with the theater students. It's a community class.
But it's not fair. What if I want to learn about theater too? I'm a full-time student. I'm not enrolled in the theater arts program, but I'd love a chance to work on a play. The instructor is the director of the theater program. I would enjoy taking this course just for fun, but I can't because I'm a student. It doesn't make sense.
Maybe you should go talk to the dean.
I think I will. Maybe I can convince him that this rule discriminates against students.
The man expresses his opinion about the theater course. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to a student as she says,
My two sons have been enrolled at the campus child care for a semester now. However, I have to say our experience has been less than satisfactory. For one thing, there really isn't enough space there. There's room for only 20 children at a time, which means a lot of people can't get their children in. My children were on the waiting list for 3 months before getting in. This is a real problem because it prevents a lot of parents from going to college. The college really needs to find a bigger space so there will be more room for children, don't you think? Another thing is, they need to extend the evening hours past 9 o'clock because some of the classes don't end until 9:30. So if you have a class that lasts until 9:30, you have to leave early to pick up your children. This isn't fair to the parents who need those night classes because they miss important information in class.
The woman expresses her opinion on the on-campus child care. State her opinion and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion.
Because a fungus can survive, control such a disease is to remove and destroy the infected plants, as well as 6 centimeters of soil around them. Avoid spreading disease by washing off your tools and your shoes when you go from an infected area to a healthy part of your garden. At the end of the gardening season, do a complete cleanup.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a box.
Because a fungus can survive for years in the soil, the best way to control such a disease is to remove and destroy the infected plants, as well as 6 centimeters of soil around them. Avoid spreading disease by washing off your tools and your shoes when you go from an infected area to a healthy part of your garden. At the end of the gardening season, do a complete cleanup. You can also keep disease away by rotating crops. Crop rotation can be effective in preventing soil-borne disease, especially when the disease is caused by a fungus that likes specific plants. For example, the fungus that causes southern blight is attracted to tomatoes. Once this fungus is present, it will thrive in the soil from year to year, attacking the tomato plants. With crop rotation, you don't grow the same plant in the same place for at least 3 consecutive years. So, for example, if you grow tomatoes one year, the next year you shouldn't plant tomatoes in the same place. By planting something else the second and third years, any tomato-loving fungus that survived the winter wouldn't have any tomato plants to feed on. With 3 years between planting tomatoes, the fungus will die off from lack of a host plant.
Explain ways that a gardener can control plant disease caused by a fungus, and explain why these methods work. Now listen to part of a talk on this.
A recent study on emotional intelligence looked at the mental health of young people with high intellectual and artistic abilities. The researcher interviewed gifted students from 12 to 17 years old. He asked them questions like, do you ever think about your own thinking? And if you ask yourself, who am I? What is the answer? So the researcher found all of his subjects to be extremely intense and enthusiastic young people. The subjects experienced emotional highs and lows that caused intense happiness, but also conflict, pain, and a tendency to get overexcited. For example, One 16-year-old said, I am a very misunderstood person. People think that my life is easy because I am talented, but I have a lot of problems of my own just because of these talents. I am a very sensitive and emotional person. I get angered or saddened very easily. What the student said shows us that people with emotional intelligence understand their feelings. However, when young people think deeply about everything and feel everything very strongly, they often experience problems. They're criticized and teased, and they start to believe that something is wrong with them. They feel embarrassed and guilty for being different from everyone else.
The professor discusses a study on emotional intelligence. Explain how emotional intelligence affects the experiences of young people like those in the study. Now listen to part of a lecture in a
name often associated with boycotts is Cesar Chavez. Chavez was a labor union organizer who used nonviolent action to achieve the goals of fair pay and better working conditions for farm workers. Chavez organized a union of grape pickers in California. When the farm owners who grew table grapes refused to accept the union, Chavez organized a nationwide boycott of grapes. The workers stopped picking grapes, and the grapes began to rot on the vines. The boycott got a lot of attention. Lots of people from all across the country, public officials, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens, all went to California to march in support of the farm workers. As a result of the boycott, some grape growers signed agreements with the union. So the union ended the boycott, and the workers began to pick grapes again. Chavez also called for a boycott of lettuce produced by growers without union contracts. People from all parts of the country refused to buy lettuce. Some even protested in front of supermarkets. The power of boycotts is the negative attention they direct at the people responsible for an offense. In the case of the grape and lettuce boycotts, the growers were the offenders. The boycotts hurt the grape and lettuce growers economically because people stopped buying their products. But even more importantly, the boycotts hurt their reputation.
Explain what happens during a boycott and explain the causes and effects of the boycotts discussed in the lecture. Now listen to part of a lecture on this.
Okay, I want to say a couple of things about social roles and role partners. Because relationships exist among various social roles, we can't study one role all by itself. We have to look at a role in relation to its role partners. For example, a man can't be a father without a child, so father and child are role partners. When there's competition between the expectations of different role partners, we have something called role conflict. For example, as a college student, you've probably noticed that your parents and your friends, both role partners to you, often expect different behavior from you. Your parents want you to stay home and study hard, while your friends say, you've studied enough, let's go out and party. This is a case of role conflict, and you feel stress of the conflict between your role as a child and your role as a friend. Mature adults experience the most severe role conflicts. The main conflict is the tension between responsibility to an employer and responsibility to spouse and children. The conflict between work and family roles is especially difficult for women, who feel a great amount of stress because in our society, women are still expected to make their family role primary.
Explain the concept of role conflict and explain when and why a person experiences role conflict. Now listen to part of a lecture on this.
A few species of birds will store food in hiding places for later use. For example, nutcrackers bury food and are able to remember the locations of the hiding places with great accuracy. They use landscape features, like distinctive rocks, logs, and other landmarks, as spatial cues to where the food is buried. Spatial memory allows the birds to return and dig up most of the food. Even when an object, such as a log or rock, has been moved, the birds appear to search in a particular spatial relationship to the object. Experiments show that animals in familiar landscapes are very skilled at finding and investigating new objects. For example, a group of 14 baboons were put into their outdoor pen after a new object had been placed there each day when they were absent. The baboons generally took less than 3 minutes to find the new object. The new objects included both artificial things like drinking cups and balls and natural things like coconut shells and branches. The baboons clearly reacted differently to the new objects. For example, they were much more likely to touch and handle today's new object. But they quickly paid little attention to yesterday's new object. Similar experiments with other animals show that moving familiar objects will cause animals to examine the objects. Otherwise, the animals will ignore them.
Explain how the skill of spatial memory influences the behavior of specific animals.
You can also keep disease away by rotation can be effective in preventing soil-borne disease, especially when the disease is caused by a fungus that likes specific plants. For example, the fungus that causes southern blight is attracted to tomatoes. Once this fungus is present, it will thrive in the soil from year to year, attacking the tomato plants. With crop rotation, you don't grow the same plant in the same place for at least 3 consecutive years. So, for example, if you grow tomatoes one year, the next year you shouldn't plant tomatoes in the same place. By planting something else the second and third years, any tomato-loving fungus that survived the winter wouldn't have any tomato plants to feed on. With 3 years between planting tomatoes, the fungus will die off from lack of a host plant.
Now listen to a student as she discusses in the housing office.
Next semester, I'd like to move on campus. My best friend from high school will also start school here, and the two of us want to share a room in a dormitory.
Okay, but are you sure you want to room with your friend from high school?
Of course. We were best friends last year.
You know, this might sound strange, but generally we don't recommend that you share a room with your best friend.
Really?
It could work out, but a lot of times it can destroy a friendship. The reason is that knowing someone, even being best friends, isn't the same as living together. A better idea might be to live on the same floor as your friend, in the same neighborhood, so to speak, but have someone else for a roommate. This way, you'll preserve your friendship and also get to know new and interesting people.
That does sort of make sense.
Or you could live in a dorm with others of your academic major. You'll meet people with similar interests and develop relationships that can benefit you later in your professional life.
I need to think about this. Thanks for your advice.
The man expresses his opinion about the woman's desire to live on campus. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to part of a lecture in
There's growing evidence that several types of depression are linked to biological and environmental factors. For example, one mild form of depression is linked to the changes in the amount of daylight. People with seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, have repeated bouts of depression during a particular time of the year, usually fall or winter, when the periods of daylight are shorter. Research suggests that the disorder is related to the body's biological clock and to changes in body temperature and hormone levels. So when your body doesn't get enough sunshine, the result is symptoms that are similar to those of major depression, but usually not as serious. Usually you have no energy and just want to sleep more, or you eat more carbohydrates and gain weight. The symptoms usually disappear when the days start getting longer in the spring. So just as in most other types of mild depression, the symptoms go away when the underlying problem goes away in the spring. However, some people with the disorder can't wait for spring, so they get relief from a treatment that involves exposure to light from a special fluorescent tube for a certain number of hours each day. Since they can't get real sunlight, they spend a few hours in a room with this special light that fools the body into thinking it's getting sunlight.
Describe the form of depression discussed in the lecture, explaining its causes, symptoms, and treatment. Now listen to two students.
I just transferred here from another college and we didn't have seminars there. I don't think I'll like seminars.
How do you know you won't like seminars if you've never had one before?
Well, the program seminar reminds me of the class discussions we had in high school. I didn't like those discussions because 2 or 3 students always did all the talking. Everyone else in the class had to listen to what the big talkers had to say. There was never a chance for the shy or quiet people to speak up and say what they were thinking. So most of the discussions were pretty boring.
But the seminars at this school aren't like that. Sometimes 1 or 2 students lead the discussion, but usually everyone participates.
I'd rather listen to what the professor has to say. After all, it's the professor who has the knowledge. It's the professor who's supposed to teach us, not the students.
I think you'll change your mind about seminars. After you see what they're really like.
The woman expresses her opinion about seminars. State her opinion and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to part of a lecture in.
One of the leading artists of abstract expressionism was a painter by the name of Jackson Pollock. Like other artists of the movement, Pollock tried to express his feelings through painting. He developed an abstract style of painting, where he vigorously dripped complicated patterns onto enormous canvases. His devotion to the act of painting led to the term action painting. Pollock was influential not just for his art, but for the process of making it. He painted his huge canvases on the floor, so he could work around and over the canvas. He felt more at ease on the floor. He could walk around the painting, work from all four sides, and literally be in the painting. He sort of danced around the borders of the canvas. He spattered the canvas with sprays and drips of paint. Pollock gave the drip a special character. His technique was to hold the brush or stick a foot above the canvas, and then to throw lines of paint in the air so the paint would fall on the canvas. He controlled this gesture skillfully, and thus the painting grew from his control of the drip. A lot of Pollock's paintings were called all-over paintings because the paint fills the entire canvas. In these paintings, the canvas is filled with a series of lines, curves, and loops, twisting forms of color that suggest movement, an effect entirely given by the skillful gestures of the artist's brush.
The professor describes the painting style of Jackson Pollock. Explain how Pollock's style made him a leading artist of the movement called abstract expressionism.
Say, Lenny, do you know anyone who wants a...
Hi.
Well, this poor little cat showed up outside my apartment one day. He was hungry and cold, so I gave him some cheese, and now he's still hanging around. My landlord found out and said I have to get rid of it because pets aren't allowed.
You shouldn't be feeding it. If you stop giving it food, it'll go away.
I know, but he's so hungry. I like the cat, and I want him to have a good home. Actually, I'd like to keep him myself.
Well, if that's the case, then you'd better look for another apartment, one that allows pets.
I hate to do that. My apartment is so close to campus.
Why don't you give the cat to your mother? She likes animals.
My mother already has 2 cats, so I don't know.
Well, you'd better do something fast, or your landlord will throw you out.
Listen to a conversation between two.
Lenny, do you know anyone who wants a cat?
A cat? No, why?
Well, this poor little cat showed up outside my apartment one day. He was hungry and cold, so I gave him some cheese, and now he's still hanging around. My landlord found out and said I have to get rid of it because pets aren't allowed.
You shouldn't be feeding it. If you stop giving it food, it'll go away.
I know, but he's so hungry. I like the cat, and I want him to have a good home. Actually, I'd like to keep him myself.
Well, if that's the case, then you'd better look for another apartment, one that allows pets.
I hate to do that. My apartment is so close to campus.
Why don't you give the cat to your mother? She likes animals.
My mother already has 2 cats, so I don't know.
Well, you'd better do something fast, or your landlord will throw you out. Throw you out.
Describe the woman's problem and the suggestions the man makes about how to solve it. What do you think the woman should do, and why? Number 1. 2 students.
Is something wrong with your arm?
Oh, not really. It's just that my elbow is bothering me.
What happened to it?
It's been a little sore lately. I think I lift too many heavy boxes at my job.
Well, you'd better go to the clinic and have someone look at your elbow. Are you free right now?
Yes, for a little while.
Well, come on then. I'll walk over there with you. I'm already heading that way.
I can't go to the clinic right now. I have baseball practice at 3 o'clock.
Baseball practice? You shouldn't play baseball if your elbow hurts.
I know, but I can't afford to miss any more practice. I've missed a lot already, and my coach will be angry.
You need to tell your coach about your elbow and ask your boss for something else to do besides lifting heavy things.
There isn't anything else to do at my job.
Well, then you'd better look for a different job. You could really hurt yourself if you're not careful.
I know.
Describe the man's problem and the suggestions the woman makes about what he should do. What do you think the man should do, and why? Number 2. Between a student and her academic advisor.
I need help with my registration for winter quarter.
Okay. What can I do for you?
I still need to take another course in social science, but it doesn't look like anything will fit into my schedule.
I see what you mean. You've already got a full schedule. Why don't you wait until spring quarter to fulfill the social science requirement?
Because I'll be doing an internship in the spring that'll be full-time.
Well, you could take an evening course. There are lots of evening classes in the social sciences, in both winter and spring quarters.
An evening course? Ugh. I don't like going to class at night.
Well, with your schedule, this may be your only choice. Another possibility, of course, is to wait until summer and fulfill the social science requirement then. Will you be around this summer?
I hope to graduate and then go home for the summer. So this is kind of a problem for me.
Describe the woman's problem and the suggestions her advisor makes about how to solve it. What do you think the woman should do, and why? Number 3. List students.
How are your classes going?
All right, mostly. That is, except for environmental science. The class is fine, but my learning partner, the guy I'm supposed to do my project with, well, to be honest, he's lazy. I've done all the work so far, but we're being graded together.
That's not good. You need to have a serious talk with your partner. You can't let him ruin your grade. You need to lay out a plan for who does what and when. He has to take responsibility for his part of the project.
That's for sure. He's hard to get a hold of, too. I've left several messages on his answering machine.
You'd better let your professor know about this. Maybe he'll let you do the project with someone else.
It's kind of late for that. Besides, I've already started working on it, and so has everyone else.
You never know.
So has everyone else.
You never know. Maybe you could sort of look around for another group to join. But I would see what your professor says first.
Describe the man's problem and the suggestions the woman makes about how he should deal with it. What do you think the man should do, and why? Number 4. Students.
Hi, Nicole. How's it going?
My classes are going well. I wish I could say the same for my car.
What's wrong with your car?
I'm not sure exactly. It just won't start up sometimes. It gave me a lot of trouble this morning. It took me 10 minutes to get it running, and then I was late for class. I need to have it checked out, but my regular mechanic is expensive, and I still have to pay my tuition.
You could take your car to the community college. They have a program in automotive technology, and they fix students' cars for less than a regular mechanic would charge.
But I'm not a student at the community college.
Check it out anyway. Maybe you don't have to be a student at that school. Just tell them you're a student.
Well, maybe.
Another place you could try is the bulletin board in the student center. People sometimes advertise services like this. Maybe you can find a mechanic that's not too expensive.
Maybe. Thanks for the tips.
No problem. Good luck.
The students discuss two possible solutions to the woman's problem. Describe the problem. Then state which of the two solutions you prefer and explain why. Number 5. Student and a professor.
Professor Fisher, I'm not going to be in class on Monday, so I'll miss the test. I was wondering if I could make it up later.
Well, you know my policy is not to give makeup tests. If you miss one test, then you can try to earn extra points on the other tests. But haven't you already missed a test?
Yeah, I missed one a few weeks ago.
Then try not to miss this test and try to do well on it too. Your test scores so far have not been strong. You could be in danger of not receiving credit for the course.
Do you mean I might fail?
At this point, you need to do something to raise your grade. Why don't you get a tutor to help you, or get a classmate to be your study partner?
Well, I guess I could. But to tell the truth, I don't have the extra time for a tutor or study partner.
Then in that case, you need to think about whether or not you should stay enrolled in this course. If you're too busy to study and come to class, you should consider dropping it.
Describe the man's situation and the suggestions his professor makes about what he should do. What do you think the man should do, and why? Listen to part of a lecture in which the professor is talking about mass migrations of people.
In the 19th century, there were several periods when large numbers of people moved from one place to another around the world. In many cases, people moved to another continent. These mass migrations were on a much larger scale than any previous migrations in history. One major movement was from Europe to the Americas, Australia, and Africa. This migration of Europeans involved around 60 million people over 100 years. Another mass migration was from Russia to Siberia and Central Asia. Another was from China, India, and Japan to Southeast Asia. These large movements of people were made possible by the new cheap and fast means of transportation, specifically railroads and steamships. Another important factor was the rapid growth in banking and capital, by which large investors financed a lot of the settlement. In some places, immigrants were given free land and other benefits if they settled there. This is what encouraged a lot of people, both immigrant and native-born, to move westward in the United States and Canada. Thus, most regions of the U.S. and Canada were populated by the end of the 19th century. The majority of the people in these mass migrations came from the lower social and economic classes of society. The immigrants were motivated mainly by the hope of a better life for themselves and their children. Since most of the immigrants were unskilled workers, their main contribution to their new countries was the labor they supplied. It was the hard work and high hopes of the immigrants that contributed to the economic growth of their new countries.
Using points and examples from the lecture, describe the mass migrations of people in the 19th century and explain why these migrations occurred. Number 1. Management class.
Hotel managers are responsible for the overall operation of their establishment. They see that guests receive good service, so they will come back to that hotel. Managers are also in charge of finances and see that the hotel earns a profit without sacrificing service. The top executive in a hotel is the general manager. In a small hotel, the general manager may also be the owner. In large establishments with many facilities, the general manager directs the work of department managers, such as executive housekeepers, personnel managers, and food and beverage managers. General managers need to be skilled in areas of leadership and financial decision-making. They must be able to judge when to make budget cuts, and when to spend money for advertising or remodeling in order to earn profits in the future. Another type of manager is the controller. Hotel controllers usually work in large hotels, where they are responsible for the management of money. They manage the accounting and payroll departments and find ways to improve efficiency. The controller is an expert at interpreting financial statements, so the general manager and other top managers in the hotel consult with the controller on all financial matters. Large hotels rely heavily on advertising and public relations to sell their services. Such hotels have sales managers to market the services of the hotel. Sales managers have constant contact with customers and know what selling points appeal to the public. Sales managers need courses in business, marketing, and advertising in addition to hotel management.
Using points and examples from the talk, describe the duties of different types of managers in large hotels. Number 2. Listen to class. The professor is discussing climate.
Several features on the Earth's surface influence climate. 2 of these features are ocean currents and landforms. Ocean currents are formed when the Earth's rotation and prevailing winds work together. The prevailing winds push the ocean waters westward in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans until these waters bounce off the nearest continent. This causes 2 large circular ocean currents, one in each hemisphere. The current in the northern hemisphere turns clockwise, and the one in the southern hemisphere turns counterclockwise. These currents move warm water from the equator to the north and south. Warm and cold currents in the world's oceans affect the climates of nearby coastal areas. For example, the warm Gulf Stream in the Atlantic Ocean warms the coast of northwestern Europe. Without the Gulf Stream, the climate of northwestern Europe would be more like that of the cold subarctic. Landforms such as mountains also affect climate. Because of their higher elevation, mountains tend to be cooler, windier, and wetter than valleys. For example, even though Mount Kilimanjaro, Africa's highest peak, stands near the equator, its summit is always covered with snow. Another thing mountains do is interrupt the flow of winds and storms. When moist winds blow from the ocean toward land, then hit a mountain range, the moist air becomes cooler as it's forced to rise. This causes the air to lose its moisture as rain and snow on mountain slopes that face the wind. The air on the other side of the mountain will be warmer and drier.
Using points and examples from the lecture, explain how 2 features of the Earth's surface influence climate. Number 3. History class. The professor is discussing traditional beliefs about trees.
Throughout the world, there is an extensive mythology about trees. For example, the concept of a great cosmic tree, a tree of the world, appears in numerous traditions. We find the tree of the world in Norse mythology. The Norse people, the ancestors of present-day Scandinavians, honored the ash tree as the cosmic tree because it was much larger in size than all other trees in northern Europe. In southeastern Canada, the Algonquin people also believed the ash was the cosmic tree. According to their tradition, the world's first human beings came from the ash tree. The Europeans who settled in North America also had special beliefs about trees. One belief is that by carrying the seeds of the buckeye tree in their pockets, people would avoid getting a disease of the bones. Another tradition is the water dowser, a person who is said to have the ability to find water underground by using a branch from the hazel tree. I have a personal story about water dowsers because my uncle used one for digging a well on his land. My uncle hired this old man, a dowser, to help him locate the best spot to put the well, and the guy used a hazel branch to do it. He walked back and forth across the property until the branch signaled where the water was. So you can see that some people still hold this tradition. So, why have trees been so respected in world mythology? For one thing, people have always depended on trees for many of life's necessities. Food, oils, building materials, medicines, spices, and dyes. So it's really no wonder that trees are thought of as special, and why there are so many traditions about trees.
Using points and examples from the talk, describe traditional beliefs about trees and explain why people have thought of trees as special. Number 4. Listen. The professor is discussing animal life in water and on land.
Animal life began in water. When some animals moved from water to land, it was a dramatic event in animal evolution because land is an environment that's very different from water. There were several important physical differences that animals had to adapt to. The first difference between water and land is the oxygen content. Oxygen is at least 20 times more abundant in air than in water, and it spreads much more quickly through air than through water. Consequently, land animals can get oxygen much more easily than water animals can. That is, once land animals evolved the appropriate organs such as lungs. A second difference is in the density of water and air. Air is much less dense than water, and because of this, air provides less support against gravity than water does. This means that land animals had to develop strong legs to support themselves. They also needed a stronger skeleton with better structural support, a skeleton and bones designed for standing and moving in air rather than in water. And a third difference between life in water and on land is on land, the temperature of the air changes more easily than it does in water. This means that land environments experience severe and sometimes unpredictable cycles of freezing, thawing, drying, and flooding. Therefore, land animals need to protect themselves from temperature extremes. Land animals had to develop behavioral and physiological strategies to survive in warm and cold temperatures. And one important strategy is being able to maintain a constant body temperature, a physiological strategy that birds and mammals possess.
Using points and details from the talk, describe the physical differences that animals had to adapt to when they moved from water to land. Number 5. Architecture class.
In the late 19th century, New York's early skyscrapers were steel-frame stone buildings that were only 8 or 9 stories tall. Then, in 1902, the city got its first true skyscraper. It was called the Flatiron Building, and it was the first structure to come close to being the ideal skyscraper. That is, an office tower that stood apart, forever free on all sides. The Flatiron Building is 22 stories tall. It has a steel frame that's covered on the outside with stone. The first 3 stories give a sense of heaviness to the lower part of the building. The next 13 stories have windows grouped in pairs, with carved geometric patterns between them. The top stories are even more decorated with columns and arches, and the top is a heavy crown of carved stone. The Flatiron Building is different from most other skyscrapers because of the shape of the site it's built on. The irregular triangle-shaped site was the result of 3 streets coming together. Because the site is surrounded by streets, the Flatiron Building will always stand alone, separate from other buildings on all 3 sides. The building's name, actually its nickname, was a joke about its flatiron shape. At that time, electric irons hadn't been invented, so clothing was pressed with a flat iron, a heavy triangle-shaped piece of iron that was heated on top of a stove. People joked that the building looked like a flatiron, and the name stuck. Because the Flatiron Building was so narrow, a famous photographer said it looked like the front end of a huge steamship. We can honestly say that this bold design, this strange, tall, thin building, changed the design of the office building forever.
Using points and details from the lecture, describe the Flatiron Building and explain how it got its name. Now listen to part of a talk in
Agents of socialization are the people and institutions that teach you about the culture you live in, including its rules. The first agents of socialization are your parents, or other adults who take care of you when you're a baby. Your parents give you the first important lessons in how to behave in society. When you're a teenager, your peers, your friends and classmates, are important agents of socialization. Your peers support you and help you grow up and out of your family's nest. Your parents and peers are important in different ways. Your parents give you guidance on long-term goals, like career choice. But your peers are more likely to influence your immediate lifestyle choices, like how you dress and what you do for fun. And since you spend so many years in school under the guidance of teachers, teachers are also agents of socialization. Teachers give you knowledge and also serve as models for responsible adulthood. Institutions, like clubs and religious organizations, are also agents of socialization. So are the mass media, television, magazines, popular music, and the Internet.
Define agents of socialization and explain how specific agents of socialization influence an individual. Listen to part of a conversation.
How do you like living in the campus apartments?
Well, it's okay. I mean, I like the apartment, but my roommate is kind of a problem. Sometimes she uses my things without asking, mostly little things like paper and toothpaste, but once it was my favorite sweater, and she never cleans the bathroom when it's her turn.
Have you sat down with her and had a good talk about these things?
Maybe if I saw her more often. The problem is she's hardly ever home.
Try leaving her a note.
I did, but it didn't help.
Isn't there an apartment manager, someone who will help you sort out problems like this? I don't know, like set up a meeting with your roommate.
I didn't know the manager does that kind of thing. I guess I could find out.
And if that doesn't work, if talking it over doesn't help, then you should probably just move out. Find another place. There's always someone looking for a roommate.
Describe the woman's problem with her roommate and the suggestions the man makes about how she could deal with it. What do you think the woman should do, and why? Now listen to two students.
Are you going to the career workshop on Saturday?
I don't know. I don't think so. I have a lot of studying to do this weekend.
You should go. It's supposed to be really good.
Oh, yeah? How?
My professor recommended it. He owns a small business downtown, and he'll be there. He says that talking to the business people who will be there is one of the best ways to find out what's happening.
But my major isn't business, it's nursing.
Oh, but you should go anyway. There'll be a lot of people to talk to, people in health services. You should talk to people working in the field to find out more about what it's like. Some of them are graduates of this university.
But I have a test on Monday. I really need to study all day.
Study on Sunday instead. This is more important. The university has only one of these workshops each year. You shouldn't miss it. It's a good way to start looking for a job after graduation. Maybe
you're right.
The man expresses his opinion about the career workshop. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to part of a lecture in a...
We have new evidence that sleep improves our ability to learn language. Researchers have found that sleep improves the ability of students to retain knowledge about computer speech even when the students forget part of what they've learned. The researchers tested college students' understanding of a series of common words produced by a computer that made the words difficult to understand. They first measured the students' ability to recognize the words. After that, they trained the students to recognize the words and then tested them again to measure the effectiveness of the training. One group of students was trained in the morning and tested 12 hours later, at night. During that 12-hour period, the students had lost much of their learning. The students were then allowed a night's sleep and were retested the next morning. When they were tested again in the morning, their scores had improved significantly from the night before. The researchers were amazed by the loss of learning the students experienced during the day and then recovered after sleeping. The students forgot what they learned during the day because they listened to other speech or thought about other things. The results of the study are fairly clear. A good night's sleep is good for learning. Even if information is forgotten, sleep helps restore a memory.
The professor describes a study about the effects of sleep. Explain how the study supports the connections between sleep and learning. Now listen to a conversation between...
This weekend is going to be crazy. I have 2 midterm exams on Monday, and I should study all weekend, but my parents are coming to visit. They'll want to spend time with me and want me to show them around town. I look forward to seeing them, but I don't know when I'll have time to study for my exams.
Why don't you join our biology group tonight? There are 3 of us so far. We're reviewing for the midterm starting at 6 o'clock.
Tonight? I'd have to get the night off from work.
Well, if you can make it, then please come. We meet at Mark's house at 6 o'clock.
Okay, but I'll have to talk to my boss.
Another thing you could do is just explain to your parents that you have to study for examinations. I'm sure they'll understand. You don't have to spend the entire weekend with them. Just give them a list of places to go during the afternoon and then spend the evening with them.
I could at least try that. I've got to do something to get ready for exams.
The students discuss possible solutions to the woman's problem. Describe the problem. Then state which of the solutions you prefer and explain why. Now listen to part of a talk in a
Communicating with other human beings relies heavily on what is called body language, all the nonverbal signals that people send to each other. Humans have more than 100 separate gestures and facial expressions. This makes us the biggest communicators in the animal world, even without our spoken language. Body language communicates a great deal about how people perceive a social situation. When strangers first meet in a social situation, such as a meeting or a party, they often will lift their eyebrows to communicate friendly feelings. Also, they may make some hand or arm gesture, such as a salute or a handshake, to signal involvement. The human face is extremely expressive. Eye movement, for example, has an important role in regulating the rhythm of conversation. In Western society, eye contact is usually held between people about 1/3 of the time they are talking together. The closer and more friendly they are, the more often they look at each other. Often a speaker will signal his intention to speak by looking away from the other person and then continuing to look away while speaking. The listener signals his interest and attention by looking at the speaker and nodding his head slightly. Most important is the smile, the very human gesture that recognizes the other person as a fellow social being. Even though a lot of body language varies in meaning across cultures, the meaning of the smile is the same in every culture. The smile has a tremendous power to generate friendly feelings. The smile is first seen in human babies as early as 4 or 5 weeks old, and a baby can be made to smile by any smiling human face, or even by any stimulus that resembles a face, such as a simple drawing.
Using points and examples from the talk, describe the uses of gestures and facial expressions in human communication. Now listen to a student and a professor.
Professor Olson, I'll be in your writing course next session, and I was wondering if I could skip the peer feedback group and just come to the lecture and writing workshop.
Oh?
It's like this. You see, I was in a student writing group before, but it didn't help at all with my writing. The other students were not good writers, so it was a waste of time. I can't learn from other students if they don't know how to write.
Learning how to write with other students, responding to the writing of others, expressing yourself in a small group. These are important steps in the learning process.
But I can learn better from a teacher because a teacher has more education and experience. The other students don't know how to teach writing. Isn't that the teacher's job? I
promise that you'll learn from the teacher, but you'll also learn more than you think from your peers.
The man expresses his opinion about the peer feedback group. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to part of a talk on this.
The concept of cohort helps us understand the similarities and differences in the lives of adults of different ages. If we look at times of major social change, like the Great Depression of the 1930s, we can see how variations in experience affected successive cohorts. Everyone who was alive during that period was affected in some way, but because events hit each cohort at a different age, the effects are different for each cohort. The timing of events interacts with developmental issues, and this produces unique patterns of influence for each cohort. For example, one study showed that people who were teenagers during the Great Depression showed fewer long-term effects than people who were younger children at the time. The younger cohort spent a greater portion of their childhood under conditions of economic hardship, and that affected their family life and their educational opportunities. The negative effects of the Depression on the children's personalities could still be seen in adulthood. In contrast, people who were teenagers during the Depression didn't show negative effects later in life. In fact, some of them showed more independence and initiative. Thus, you can see how two cohorts that were close in age experienced the same circumstances differently because they were different ages at the time.
Describe the effect of historical events on different cohorts, and explain how the Great Depression influenced two cohorts that were close in age. Now listen to a conversation between...
How much does it cost for a permit to park my car on campus?
A parking permit is $45 for the quarter, but I'm required to tell you that a parking permit does not guarantee a parking space on campus.
What? It takes me an hour to drive here, and I have to park my car somewhere.
We know it's a problem. Our parking lots just aren't big enough for all the students we have this year. That's why I'm required to warn you about the situation.
What am I supposed to do? I have to drive to school.
One thing you can do, if possible, is register for classes that meet in the afternoon. The parking lots are usually full in the morning, but less full in the afternoon.
Okay.
Another thing you can do is park in our park and ride lot on Western Avenue, a mile from here. Your parking permit is good there, and you can usually find a parking space. You catch a free shuttle bus to campus from there. They run every 20 minutes.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate your advice.
Describe the woman's problem and the two suggestions the man makes about how to deal with it. What do you think the woman should do, and why? Now listen to part of a talk students in a business class. The speaker is discussing organizational charts.
No matter what size a business is, its organizational chart tells who is in charge of what and who reports to whom. Organizational charts facilitate the free flow of information so people can communicate with one another in an orderly way. The formal structure of many companies is designed in the shape of a pyramid. In the pyramid scheme, the labor force on the bottom supports the whole structure. In the middle are the various layers of management, one on top of the other, on up to the top. The pyramid structure defines the chain of command. Information flows up the chain, and orders flow down. Everyone knows his or her place in the hierarchy. Although the pyramid is logical, this system never satisfied me. Decision-making can take a long time. Everything must work its way up and down the chain of command. I've seen companies with this structure stagnate when the managers become as rigid as the management structure. But without a formal structure and chain of command, there would be chaos. In my company, the organizational chart looks more like a wheel than a pyramid. Management is the hub, and all the departments are the spokes, giving the wheel its shape. The labor force is the rim. Information flows up through the spokes to the hub. My company has a policy of open communication throughout the organization. This means that any staff member can go anywhere in the company to ask questions and get answers. I believe that anyone with an idea for improving the company's performance should be able to send it up to my office. I do insist, however, that every report be signed by the person who wrote it. This is so I can contact that person directly if I have questions.
Using points and examples from the talk, describe 2 types of organizational charts and explain what they reveal about an organization. Now listen to 2 students' ears.
What do you think? Are you going to volunteer for the conference?
Oh, I don't know. It's difficult for me to plan that far ahead. It's over a month away.
I know, but this conference is going to be great. There'll be a lot of prominent speakers from this country and all over the world, including a couple of scientists who won the Nobel Prize.
Really?
Yeah. And if we work for just 2 hours, we get to go to the reception and meet lots of experts on global warming. It's a great opportunity, kind of exciting for our school, isn't it? I mean, this conference is a really big event for us, and volunteering is a way to be a part of it.
That's true. But you have to work. Isn't it better to just attend the conference?
But this is one way to learn how a conference is organized. I'm really interested in knowing how to do this sort of thing since I plan to be involved in environmental issues. And
you want the free t-shirt.
Right.
The woman expresses her opinion about volunteering for the conference. State her opinion and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to part of a talk in history class.
There were lots of variations on the chase film. One of the most popular chase films was a comedy called Personal. This movie told the story of a wealthy man who advertises for a wife in a personal ad. He announces that he'll meet any potential wives at a famous landmark. But when he goes there, he ends up being chased by a crowd of eager women. This variation was such a hit that other filmmakers quickly copied it. Another variation was the slapstick police chase made famous by the Keystone Cops. The Keystone Cops were the kings of early silent comedy. The 7 clownish cops created confusion and silliness as they chased villains and bank robbers. The actors performed all their own stunts. And a lot of these stunts involved moving cars, tall buildings, and, of course, somebody getting a cream pie in the face. The chase film was not only popular, but also important in the history of film. Making chase films was a valuable exercise in film style. The movement of the chase provided its own visual excitement and led to certain filmmaking conventions. For example, it was common to have the person being chased and the people who were chasing all running forward past the camera.
Describe 2 variations on the chase film and explain why the chase film was significant in the history of film. Now listen to a conversation between.
I'm glad to see you, Alan. I want to discuss your plan to transfer to the university in the fall.
Okay.
It turns out that you still need a humanities course to complete your basic requirements.
I do?
Yes. Remember that philosophy class you dropped a while back? You never made it up, so you'll need to do that this summer.
This summer?
Yes. I suggest you take a literature course to meet the requirement.
Oh, no. I can't do it this summer. My best friend is taking his sailboat to Hawaii, and he wants me to go with him. We'll be gone all summer, so that means I can't go to school. Besides, I need the vacation.
Well, you want to go to the university, right? You need one more course to be able to transfer this fall.
But the sailing trip is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I've already promised my friend that I'd go with him.
Then you'll have to decide what's more important to you, going sailing or going to the university. I suggest you discuss this with your family and with your friend. Perhaps they will help you decide.
Describe the man's problem and the suggestions his advisor makes about what to do. What do you think the man should do, and why? Now listen to part of a talk in a professor is discussing immunization.
Before we had immunizations, thousands of children and adults died or were disabled from diseases that are now almost completely eliminated. The results of worldwide immunization programs are amazing, making this the greatest success story in medical history. Immunization works by strengthening the immune system against a specific disease in a much safer way than the disease process itself. In order to control a disease, we have to immunize at least 80% of the population. If we fall below 80%, the disease will find enough human hosts where it can live and flourish. Immunizing an entire population can eliminate bacteria or viruses that survive only if they have a human host. The methods for developing vaccines against bacterial diseases were available in the early 1900s. Researchers had discovered how to isolate bacteria and grow them in the laboratory. This led to experiments with vaccines that caused the body to produce antibodies against certain bacteria. Soon we had safe vaccines against the typhoid, cholera, tetanus, and tuberculosis bacteria. For diseases caused by viruses, some of the first successful immunizations were for smallpox, rabies, and yellow fever. The polio vaccine took a long time to develop because this virus couldn't be grown outside the living human body. Efforts to isolate the polio virus and develop a vaccine were finally successful in 1955. By this time, we had methods for cultivating viruses in the laboratory using animal tissues such as eggs. We could then develop vaccines against other viruses such as measles.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain how immunization works and how vaccines were developed against various diseases.